Ladies and gentlemen, it's really a pleasure to join you today as part of our ongoing collaboration with the Asia Society Policy Institute to explore topics critical to the success of global climate action for decades to come. I'm really thrilled to see an all-women lineup today. Gone are the days when finding a female speaker was like searching for a unicorn. Now we have a powerhouse of accomplished women leading the charge. So I'm super excited. Earlier this month, I had the privilege of joining an Asia Society event on China's evolving climate governance and implications for global climate action. China is one of the countries whose decisions in the coming years will profoundly impact how the rest of the region finances and executes the transition to low-carbon societies. The findings of the report shared earlier this month and the discussions at the event provided great insights on China's climate journey. I'm confident that today's discussions on Asia's climate finance needs will be equally insightful. When working with the Asia Society team, I'm always impressed with the rigor and candor of their research and the great utility of their insights in our own work and larger discourse on policy and other key issues. As a global philanthropy focusing on transformative action across the energy, food, health, and finance sectors to address the climate crisis, we're keen to identify and scale the most promising climate solutions and understand the avenues for expeditiously scaling them. Acknowledging the accelerating impact of climate change and its implications for humanity, last September, we announced a commitment to focus all aspects of our work, including our program, endowment, and operations, on addressing the climate crisis. This includes a commitment to invest $1 billion over the next 5 years to scale transformative climate solutions. Critically, this includes mobilizing not just our own finances and those of our core partners, but building alliances across governments, key financial institutions, the private sector, and frontline communities to bring these big bets to life. An emerging example of this is the Coal to Clean Credits Initiative, which aims to accelerate coal plant decommissioning and replacement with renewable energy sources as part of a just transition. We are now partnering with the Monetary Authority of Singapore and private sector actors in the Philippines, among others, to pilot this initiative, which itself could avert 19 million tons of coal emissions. And we hope to work with partners to scale this initiative to other parts of the world. Another example striving for transformative impact in the region is the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet. Amongst the biggest bets the foundation has ever made, we've partnered with the Bezos Earth Fund and IKEA Foundation to launch GIAP to avert emissions, provide access to energy, and support livelihoods through a just energy transition. Through CCSCI, GIAP, and other initiatives, we're also partnering with institutions including the World Bank, ADB, and AIIB to fully unlock the financial sector's climate potential. Beyond these partners, we are also pursuing reforms to the global financial system to enable greater funding flows towards developing countries' energy transition. This includes supporting key platforms like the Bridgetown Initiative and engaging global stakeholders through the G7, G20, and other avenues to advance financial system reform proposals. While we are optimistic that these initiatives will accelerate the energy transition in the region, we also recognize that much more is needed for Asia to avert the worst impacts of climate change. The financial needs to achieve this are staggering. This is increasingly recognized as a critical issue, and we will hear more on this shortly. Even within the philanthropic sector, prioritization of climate is still in progress. It's estimated that only 2% of philanthropic funding goes to climate, and only 1% of climate-related funding goes to indigenous groups, which own or manage nearly 40% of the world's intact forest land. This makes understanding climate finance needs and finding promising solutions to meet them a top priority issue for the foundation. We hope that our own investments and net zero journey can help stimulate the sweeping reimagining of public and private financing, and the bold actions required to rise to Asia's climate finance challenge. The Rockefeller Foundation has had a long-standing legacy in Asia. For more than a century, we've been investing in partnerships to solve urgent challenges in the areas of health, food, resilience, energy access, and more. Starting with the establishment of the medical programs in China and Thailand in the first decades of the 20th century, our presence and commitments have evolved with the needs of the commitments we serve. This evolution has brought us to focusing all our efforts in the region on the climate crisis, working with partners like the Asia Society to understand and respond to it. I hope today's discussions and the report launched today are helpful to you in crafting your climate strategies as they will be for us. Before closing, I would like to express my deep appreciation to the authors of the report, Meera Gopal and Kate Logan, as well extend my gratitude to Jing Qian and the entire ASPI team for their relentless support and commitment. It was wonderful to meet some of you in person earlier this month, especially the Asia Society's CEO, Kyung-Hwa Kang, and we had an insightful discussion. Without further ado, let's now welcome Rachel Kyte as the expert moderator for today's session. Her extensive experience and insights will undoubtedly enrich our discussions. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and over to you, Rachel.
Thank you so much for the kind invitation to be with you all today. You'll have to forgive me for my rather temporary setup here, but I'm in the middle of London Climate Week, which has seen an extraordinary array of events over the course of a week around mobilizing the finance necessary for the transitions of climate change. So where to start? We are not on track. We are 9 years after the Paris Agreement. We do know that the cost of inaction is higher than the cost of action, and we've known that since 2006 with the landmark report by Lord Nicholas Stern. But this has failed to galvanize government action at the international level in the way that many, in particular, least developed countries, emerging markets, and developing economies had hoped. We've also, I think, starting to see a pushback on some of the abiding rhetoric of private sector involvement, in that we see that for economies that are supposedly to lead the transition, so from advanced economies as the IMF would call them, that we would expect to see by now faster action on taking inroads into their own transitions, their own decarbonisation, and their ability to galvanise both private investment and public investment in countries that did nothing to cause the climate crisis we're in. In those countries, there is a significant pushback on the concept of energy transitions in particular, as they coincide with the difficulties of managing an energy trilemma post the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So what we've seen as energy prices spiked, the pushing through to the consumer of those energy prices, and a conflation of high energy prices with an anti-climate change rhetoric, implying that for people on low income or for ordinary people, that there is sacrifice to be made in the energy transition. So the narrative has started to be lost a little, and we started to see the implications of that in the recent European elections. And now we're a week away from elections here in the UK, where I think there will be a slightly different outcome. And we're, of course, just months away from a consequential election in the United States, which I'm sure Chantale may address. What does this all mean for Asia? Well, the good news is I think that we know basically where we can galvanize the financing from. The work that has been done over 2023 by an independent expert group of the G20 convened by India, of which I was a member, chaired by Larry Summers and N.K. Singh. What we know from the International High-Level Expert Group, which I'm also a member of, convened by Vera Songway and Nick Stern and Ahmad Bhattacharya, is that we really need to mobilize about $3 trillion a year in investment into sort of the green infrastructure necessary for the transition outside of China. So this is for emerging markets and developing economies outside of China. That 3 trillion basically breaks down into 2 trillion to be mobilized by domestically, and 1 trillion that should be mobilized from international financial sources. The sort of theory of change around that 1 trillion is that the multilateral development bank sector should be expanded. It should work harder with the capital it already has. It should extend itself and be bolder and better with the capital it already has. And then it should be made bigger. And that would get us a long part of the way to the point where public money can and will take more risk and therefore be able to bring private sector finance into emerging markets in a way that just isn't happening at the moment. For the last 20 years, 30 years, we've been talking about how to blend finance, and there is certainly an extraordinary amount of capability in blending, both in philanthropy, including Rockefeller, but of course across the MDBs and the development financial institutions and the new emerging national development banks that we see in many countries. So we know how to blend finance, but at the end of the day, somebody has to take more risk than they are prepared to do at the moment. And that, with all the fingers there, point to the multilateral development bank and development financial system. In the UN, the focus is very much on a sort of political bargain between the countries that caused the climate crisis because of their historic emissions and the countries who are in harm's way because of that emissions profile. And this is, in the finance world, this is translated into a goal of 100 billion that had to be mobilized by 2020, which wasn't mobilized by 2020 and has now been mobilized according to figures by the OECD. But the failure to deliver on that, including during a pandemic, where much of the emerging markets and developing economies were also, upset or with reason as to the unavailability of vaccines, etc., has led to a toxicity in the international climate finance discussions, which is unprecedented. At the COP29 discussions in November this year in Baku, the world is supposed to agree what a new goal would look like for finance for the years between now and 2030. Of course, the quantum is something that diplomats will fight over. For those countries in the West who would normally be expected to meet that goal, especially in an election year, this is a difficult negotiation to enter into. But it also brings up issues about how rising nations should start to contribute to these kinds of goals, with all eyes on the Gulf, but also some of the rising countries in Asia, in particular in China. So how do we move forward, think about who should be contributing to global pools of capital in order to help everybody move forward? At the moment, those negotiations are becalmed, they are stuck, and it is unclear exactly how the Azerbaijani presidency of the negotiations will find a way to unstick them before November. But I think underneath the complexity of the politics of climate finance in the UN system, and alongside the difficulty of having a conversation about growing the capital within the multilateral development bank system when geopolitics is as tense as it is, we can look to the private sector and we can see that the transitions are underway. And we can see that individual firms and individual sectors are making strong progress in how to decarbonize their own balance sheets and how to decarbonize their own supply chains. But the one thing that I see from many Asian countries is the need and support that they need to work out how to exploit all the potential avenues of finance, how to develop a national green bank or a development bank, how to really optimize bond issuance, how to think about fiscal and tax policy reform that would allow them to mobilize the domestic resources, how to build credit enhancement facilities that would allow some of this private finance to blend with domestic finance for green infrastructure investment. I also see lots of questions around carbon markets, not only the Article 6 negotiations, which need to be concluded at the COP, but also conversations around developing of regulated markets and the promise of voluntary carbon markets, where most of the activity is actually coming from the Asian region, in particular Singapore, but also China, Australia, and then to Western Asia and to Saudi Arabia and UAE. So for countries, how to understand the impact of an emerging green nationalism from the impacts of the Inflation Reduction Act, the impacts of carbon border adjustments in Europe, how to understand how to exploit carbon markets for full potential and to keep resources within a jurisdiction, and then how to mobilize domestic finance, and then how to get hands on that very useful, flexible, and it should be greater risk-taking than it is at the moment, public finance. So I'll stop here and hand over to somebody who has an extraordinary perspective as a long-standing diplomat, long-standing leader within the multilateral development bank system, and a very effective representative of the United States. So Chantale Wong, the floor is yours.
Wow. Thank you, Rachel. I'm not sure I can answer all of those questions you put there on the table, but really thank you for the opportunity to really discuss really this critical topic of meeting Asia's climate finance needs. I'm really pleased to have this opportunity to speak again to Asia Society. It's really an honor to speak alongside Dr. Elka Pangestu, and certainly Rachel, a dear friend who in her most recent role has really helped ADB embark on this journey to become Asia's climate bank by putting its program together at Tufts to train a significant portion of our staff to specifically focus on climate. So thank you, Rachel, for doing that. So the ADB, as you all know, is really at the forefront of addressing a lot of these climate needs. Today, the challenges in the region are many, and certainly the opportunities are there as well. And maybe a little bit about sort of what we're seeing already in terms of climate so far. All the social implications that are happening. So emissions, for example, 39% of global greenhouse gas emissions are here, and we consume about 60% of the world's coal. This high level of emissions is really contributing to rapid warming of the region, which is experiencing temperature increases faster than any global average. For example, I think Tokyo, I heard, was at 50 plus degrees at one point this summer. So rising sea level, 2-meter rise will displace over 180 million people, mostly across Asia. Countries like Bangladesh and Indonesia are particularly vulnerable, here in the Philippines as well, with millions at risk of losing their homes due to flooding. And of course, many of the Pacific Island countries, I'm reminded, Rachel, when you came to talk to us in Manila, basically you said these countries are their fate are sealed already, even at 1.5 degree that we're talking about. Extreme weather events, the region's most disaster prone in the world. About half of the world's Asia population live in low-lying coastal areas at risk of intense flood, storms, degradation due to increased desalination. Average about 43,000 people in the Asia Pacific are killed annually in storms, floods, landslides. Of course, impact on food security in terms of crops, spiking food prices. All of this is really, really happening already. The heat waves, the floods, a third of the country of Pakistan was under flood. And so a loss of certainly lives and livelihoods. And then this one particular area that I'm actually trying to mobilize help around, particularly trying to understand what is going on, is the Hindu Kush Himalaya region, which is really known as the third pole because of the glaciers it covers. The permafrost is actually area is receding. That the glaciers that covers most of those countries within is highly vulnerable to temperature increase, leading to thawing, subsequent risks to natural systems and human infrastructure. Mount Everest is actually sinking, if you can believe that. The release of the permafrost has, methane, which is the highest contributors to GHG, and has already triggered geohazards like the GLOF. I didn't know what a GLOF is, but it's the glacial lake outburst flow. There's already 3 that has already happened in our region, where glacial lakes that have been frozen in time are now bursting, taking away land, infrastructure, everything along the way. I actually got to hike into the Malamchi Valley in Nepal, where I saw the destruction firsthand. So addressing these challenges really require multifaceted approach to reduce these emissions, but also adapting in this region. We now need to adapt, not just to reduce emissions, but to adapt to these inevitable changes, supporting the most vulnerable communities to mitigate the impacts. So the good news, as Rachel has alluded to, we've been really moving on in an effort to with many other countries, embark on the evolution of these MDB systems. It is critical in the context of the global financial architecture to meet these climate change. This evolution involves several fronts to enhance its impact and scale. So let me just highlight some of the ongoing things that we're doing within the MDB system. And one is to collaborate better, to be more one system, to enhance this cooperation to scale impact, to improve operational efficiencies, and aligning these global policy agendas, ensuring strategic focus on development, climate, and regional, particularly regional challenges. On financial innovation, we have actually started some initiatives a few years ago now, called the Energy Transition Mechanism, the ETM, and the innovative financing for climate in Asia and the Pacific. That demonstrates for us our effort to really come up with different solutions or innovative solutions, which includes promoting blended finance, which Rachel, you mentioned, as well as leveraging credit ratings of the countries that are contributing to this the pot of money for climate project finance. So by providing guarantees and other instruments, IFCAP, for example, aims to de-risk investments in climate mitigation and adaptation, thereby unlocking billions of dollars in much needed climate finance. ETM is groundbreaking. It's making an effort aiming at accelerating the early retirement of coal-fired power plants. And we got the Cirebon 1, which is in Indonesia, we've been really working through that. And thanks to many of the partners here, including Rockefeller, that has been really out there to help us blend all of the different levels of risk that are different entities will take on, and then as well as supporting expansion of renewable energy capacity in the region. So you talked a little bit about mobilization, financial mobilization, recognizing the 1 trillion, I think you mentioned, annual investment needed from the MDB system for climate mitigation and adaptation in Asia Pacific. So we are working to mobilize private capital to fill the gap, the funding gap. That we have a portion of it, but we need to. That is not sufficient, and so we're trying to mobilize the private capital to meeting these climate targets. So. In terms of the evolution that I talked about within ADB, this is what we're working on: mission to deal with mission vision. So since 2020, ADB has been focused on integrating climate considerations in its core mission. And we've declared ourselves to be the climate bank for Asia and the Pacific, acknowledging the profound impact of climate change on economic development and regional livelihoods. And so we're working on really an organizational change, adapting, restructuring the organization to enhance the ability to deliver on climate goals, including incentive structures, not only for member countries, but also for staff, aiming at accelerating climate action outcomes, not only the financing or the dollars going into it, which is a lot of the focus has always been how much money you're moving out the door, but really focusing in on outcomes. How much GHG are you reducing? And then financial commitment, as you mentioned, Rachel, the G20 recommendations about expanding the MDB system. ADB has actually looking at our balance sheets, looking at our risk tolerance, our capacity, what we call the capital adequacy framework. We were able to find $100 billion. I call it, they found $100 billion under the mattress somewhere in lending capacity over the next decade without any of our shareholders having to put a dime in while maintaining the AAA credit rating. So ensuring that there's robust financial backing for climate projects in the region, and we're still looking, at the other recommendations that are coming out of that came out of the G20. For example, callable capital. Is there a value to it? We have across the system looked at the callable capital. Now we're engaging the rating agencies to see how much value we can get out of that. Looking at hybrid capital. So all of the different recommendations that have come out of the G20, we're actually taking it on board. So let me sort of conclude this section by saying that addressing Asia Pacific climate finance really requires concerted effort across the MDBs, but also governments and the private sector. I actually just returned from Singapore, where Secretary Raimondo brought through the IPEF system a lot of the investors, private capital, to the table for green finance or energy transition. And I have to say that invariably every single one of these private capital is saying that we have the money, we want to invest, but the enabling environment is very difficult in all of these countries. So that should be the remit of the ADB. So that's something that I'm really going to be focused on, to making sure that when we do policy dialogues, when we have discussions with the governments, we are also helping them to really be able to unlock the private capital coming in. So I'll stop there.
Chantale, thank you so much. I mean, that was really comprehensive. And I think it really is important to sort of call out innovation and ambition, because we spend a lot of time critiquing big organizations as well. And both the INCAF and other innovations at the Asia Development Bank are really extraordinarily important. And I think also the focus is always very much on mobilizing finance for mitigation. But the ADB is really a critical partner in the adaptation and resilience needs of the countries in the Asia Pacific regions. So there's a lot going on, and Chantale's playing an important role there. So without further ado, now to the one and only Mari Pangestu, who brings the extraordinary experience of working at the ministerial level, in a very big and critical country for the world's transition to net zero, but has also occupied the highest ranks of a multilateral organization at the global level. And so she's seen it all, the good, the bad, maybe even some of the ugly, I don't know. But Mari, over to you. I mean, I think you bring two perspectives together. It'd be really important for us to understand how you see the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. First of all, congratulations to ASPI on this very timely report on Asia's climate finance needs and opportunities, advancing a shared vision. I think this is what we all hope to have. And it's great to be on the same panel as Rachel and Ambassador Chantale Wong, an all-women panel. Actually, everybody here on the screen is a woman. So I think this is really great. I was recently appointed as Indonesia's special envoy on climate finance, and also the Indonesia-led G20 Global Blended Finance Alliance is finally launched. So you can tell that this topic, all that you've said, is very close to my heart. So let me add to all your excellent points by making 3 points, and let me take a developing country kind of lens and try to understand the financing gap that we all talk about in a broader context. So first of all, why Asia? I think both Rachel and Chantal already mentioned why Asia. It is contributing 56% of the global CO2 emission, with China accounting for more than half of that, but India is there, and the rest of Asia is actually almost 20%. So it's not insignificant. And we are also 68% of total global coal consumption. And so we are, if Asia can, if climate action can be accelerated in Asia, you can hopefully see some impact on the reduction of the GHG emissions. And I just wanted to highlight how we have moved. You mentioned 2006, where Nick's very influential report talked about the trade-off is between inaction and action now. And that has actually now resonated even with developing countries. And I think Glasgow was an important turning point where a number of developing countries actually came out with net zero commitments, including China, including India, including Indonesia. But I think the main message from developing countries at the time was, yes, we are willing to be more ambitious. Yes, we are willing to take more action to phase out or phase down, as the Indians managed to change the use of coal. But where's the money? So this is really where the rubber hits the road, as they say. And in turn, the ones with the money. So Glasgow was also important in terms of the shift in the private sector, and you had GFANZ offering 130 trillion, and so the ones who have the money say, okay, we have the money, but so the ones who need the money say, where's the money? The ones who have the money, as you said, Chantal, where are the projects? We want to invest, but where are they? So it's not just about the 100 billion. It's beyond that, because we all know that it will need the private sector, not just concessionary funding. So I think since Glasgow, we have all been in many discussions. How do you match this funding and the ones who need funding? And we had, let me just say something about JETP as an example of an attempt to do this. But unfortunately, I think from a developing country perspective, it was seen as too much as top-down, G7 coming and saying, you have to get out of coal. That was the main message that came. But after a lot of debate and discussion, it did transpire that, no, it can't just be about coal phase out. As you know very well, ADB was very much involved in this discussion. You do have to have a holistic picture. And this is where I appreciate the ASPI report, because they talk about the need for a whole of government, whole of economy, and I would add whole of society approach. Because what really is the key, when you said enabling environment, I would probably emphasize that, okay, ADB, World Bank, when I was at the World Bank, we all tried to help countries design the right kind of enabling environment. But if it doesn't come from the country itself, it's not going to work. It's not going to stick. So this is not new. I'm trying to propose that really what's needed is a country-owned and country-led platforms, focusing on 2 or 3 priorities, including adaptation, mitigation and adaptation. And this is exactly what Indonesia's been trying to do. I wouldn't say we have succeeded yet, but learning from the G7 experience, actually, we said, oh, no, you can't just come down. It can't be top down. But it actually galvanized the Indonesians. So we better get our act together here. And it really is about defining the different investment needs. And therefore, the financing is different for the different needs. Some have very low return and high risk. Some have good returns, say renewable energy. But so how do you blend? When you talk about blended finance, it is about a combination of the policy reforms and about the cleaning up, the environmental costs, the social costs, replacing the base. This is in the case of energy transition, obviously, replacing the base load and then developing a sustainable supply chain. So at the moment, I will just share with you what we're trying to do is to convince, we have a new government coming in. So let's say just convince any government that, going back to Nick Stern's, and I know you were involved too, Rachel, with Amar Bhattacharya and Vera Songwei. It's not about climate. Because the moment you say, okay, you need to do ambition on climate and so on, doesn't really resonate with politicians and policymakers. We say this is the growth story of that you can achieve growth. And it's an investment story. If you want investment, this is what you need to do. And it's a green growth story. It's jobs and so on. And it is the only way you're going to be competitive because investors are looking for clean energy. You're going to face CBAM. You're going to be part of the sustainable supply chain and so forth. And I think someone sent me this 2 days ago, and I thought this was interesting because in Indonesia, for the first time, we just had elections. All three candidates had climate change in their platform. This is like totally new for us. And a recent UNDP survey in 77 countries, 86% of Indonesians said that they wanted the government to take action on climate crisis. So in other words, the politics is kind of turning, just like it did in Europe. So I think the timing is right. So now let's second and third point quickly. How do we address the financing gap? I think the role of the MDB reforms about bigger and better and doing more on climate and development. We heard what ADB is doing. AIIB is doing something too. World Bank is increasing its climate finance from 35% to 45%. But I tried to add up this additionality. I think you mentioned 100 billion, Chantal. World Bank, I think the number with the hybrid capital is 120 billion, and AIIB is 50 billion. So if you add that up, it really only comes up to 27 billion a year additional. That ain't going to make it, right? You need trillions. So, but it doesn't mean that there's not a role for this additional capital. It's how do you, the third point I would make is the private sector, right? How do you mobilize and catalyze the private sector in a blended financing structure? And here is where I think what I've learned from listening to so many discussions on this, private capital needs the enabling environment. And that's why country platforms are so important, because the country has to define the policy direction and the certainty and identify the pipeline of projects and have this portfolio of projects. Can't be just one project because you want to be, balancing the risk and so on. And you have to come up with de-risking and reducing the cost instruments. And this is where philanthropy can play a role, guarantee instruments, and private sector, this comes from many, many sources, but the private sector's main complaint is enabling environment, political uncertainty, and foreign exchange risk, right? So I think the discussion has to switch to, okay, what is it that the private sector needs and what are the instruments, both from the market or from MDBs that need to come about to make this blended finance happen and make it be able to be structured, replicated, and scaled up. I think that to me is the biggest challenge. Going back to my final point is that this country-led, country-owned platform, I mean, country approach is not new, but I think the way we do it, that the country has to lead, and it has to include all stakeholders from the beginning, including the private sector. I think that's what's been missing in the country platforms. You're not including the private sector from the beginning. And this is something I hope that with our G20 Global Blended Finance Alliance, we can try to do this. Thank you.
Well, that's really wonderful. You've both given a very wide angle on how the issue looks from the perspectives from where you sit and from the perspectives that you bring. There is an opportunity, a very short opportunity from questions from the audience, but I want to play one question back to both of you briefly, right? So the same question, which is, from the perspective of government, right? Governing is difficult, right? At the best of times, at the local level, at the national level, you're dealing with 1,000 different things all at the same time. Climate change is impacting your fiscal base. It's affecting everything now, right? I mean, we've seen from the extreme heat, it's not just an issue of infrastructure and renewable energy. It's the dependency of your healthcare system, of your education system, et cetera, et cetera. And what I see in my academic work as well as my other work is, how do you keep it simple for government? How do you help government therefore maintain ambition because they're able to make progress? And how do you help government maintain the coalition that got them into power in the first place? Mari talked about the fact that all three candidates in the Indonesian election had climate in their manifestos and sort of talked about climate. Here in the United Kingdom, we've just had a series of debates between the candidates for the future prime minister, where climate's not been mentioned once in any one of the debates, right? So I'm glad to see emerging markets taking the lead. But the question to the two of you is, if there was a sort of recipe card, the 1, 2, or 3 things that governments should be thinking about or doing when it comes to financing their transitions, what would be your advice? I mean, obviously, Mari, you're in a position of significant national influence now, but how should we think about the order in which governments need to do things in order to realize the investment that they need externally, but also in terms of mobilizing their own investment? Perhaps to you, Chantale, first, and then to Mari.
Yeah, thank you. So unfortunately, our political system is pushing us the other direction as well. And that if the election doesn't go the way I would prefer, there's the climate deniers are out there. In fact, anything that has the word climate is going to be a big challenge. So from the U.S. perspective, that's going to be a huge one. In terms of the governments, I would say, for me, the ADB is a blunt instrument. The MDBs are. I think for me, what I see from our perspective, we've been really focused on infrastructure, and that's our bread and butter since the beginning, 50 plus years of that. So we need to really help our own institutional capacity to really reorient the look into how do we move out, help the countries, and we're I guess trusted partners for those 50 years. We have really good relationships on the ground, and to devise these country, as Mari has said, to help the governments devise these country platforms and country-owned platforms to really get them to the place where they need to go through diagnostics, through stakeholder engagement, through their own development plans, which is what needs to happen. And so I don't think we're still not, thank you for training all of our folks to help us get there. We're still not functionally in that direction. So that's something that I'm going to try to push very hard. In terms of private capital, again, it is also the DNA of the institution is about infrastructure, getting dealing with governments borrowing. This is the bread and butter, and that's the DNA. So we need to really reorient these institutions to really to help turn the world upside down, to move out and to help these countries with developing those country platforms that Mari has talked about. So I see a lot of work ahead of us on that front.
Mari, to you, please.
Yeah, I think three things. Having been in this spot, when I was in government and so on, I think getting the narrative right is key. And for me, getting the narrative right is not telling the government, well, you got to do this because you got to meet the Paris Agreement. That's the wrong narrative. So we've been trying to develop the narrative that it is about growth. And if you don't do something about climate now, you are going to have lower growth. And having numbers, I think having numbers and being able to simulate the numbers is very important. That's why diagnostics is very important. And, I've done a lot of work with the planning ministry as an academic, trying to develop their modeling. And now the World Bank has come up with the country climate development reports. And we can show that if you don't do anything, your growth is going to be 1.2 to 6% lower, not 10 years from now, but 5 years from now. You're going to have lower productivity because of pollution, health, impact, et cetera, et cetera. So get the numbers. And this is what I always say, scare them into action. But that's not enough. You got to give the positive. This is an opportunity for increasing your productivity, to increase your competitiveness and jobs. Politicians and policymakers want to know job creation, right? But you can't solve everything. So you have to identify the priority sectors within that and go for the system change. So it's not just infrastructure, as Chantale mentioned. You've got to think about the social impact and so on. And this is where you have to be able to talk in the language that the politicians understand and will resonate with them, because they're worried that if you remove the fuel subsidy, for instance, which is one of the key parts of the reform, you're going to have protests like the Yellow Jackets in France and what happened in Chile. It's the lower middle class that's going to be affected. So you've got to come up with good targeted repurposing the subsidy and then targeting the lower middle class so that they are still having affordable energy or affordable food or whatever it is. So you have to come up also with the their political concerns. And the last thing I would do is, which I have been trying to do, is get the young people moving. Come on, guys. You've got to be the ones, you are 50% of the 60% of the voters are young people here. So you've got to be really the one pushing the government for this change, because it's, your life, your livelihoods in the future.
So I'm going to come back. That was great from both of you, and absolutely underline the extraordinary power of Asian youth mobilized. I'm going to sort of bundle together a bunch of questions that we're getting in, and I'm only really going to have time, I think, to come back to you with one composite question, given the time we have. And that is, so Mari, you from Indonesia. Indonesia famously has a JETP, a Just Energy Transition platform. Within the region, Bangladesh's country, I'm going to forget the acronym now, but the country platform or country coordination mechanism that the Bangladeshis are pushing forward with the assistance of the Asia Development Bank, the World Bank, AIIB, everybody's involved. This has become now the new work of art, right? That the countries want country platforms as a way to sort of bring all the public acronyms together, and then to have some way for countries to be able to engage with that, and then to crowd in the private investment that's necessary. The questions we're getting are about your experience with them, but I think that perhaps putting two or three of these questions together, given what we've learned over the last 2 to 3 years or since Glasgow, and looking at what the sort of timeline is and the size of the need, do you have any reflections on what an effective country platform might look like, and sort of any reflection on country platforms? And then I think if you could keep that reflection brief, perhaps each of you will have one last chance to leave us with one last thought. Perhaps Mari, to you first on JETP.
Yeah, I think that the term country-led and country-owned is the key. because you can, and that's the important element. And so the country has to internally coordinate. And this is where, institutionally speaking, I think, South Africa actually had a national climate task force. And Brazil, by the way, has also now got a country platform. Indonesia, we don't have overarching climate, national climate, whatever you call it, task force or minister, high level minister. I think that's the key, because it's a lot of coordination. That would be one input. The second input is that it is about designing the policies and in the short term, medium term, and longer term, and identifying the investment needs, and also how much government budget will be put there. What are the fiscal policies, including repurposing subsidies, that are part of that package before you go out and say, okay, we need concession funding, we need a private sector, I like private sector to come in, and so on. So you got to design it as an investment and financing story, but in a very credible way.
Excellent. Chantale, any thoughts?
I don't have a lot of experience. The only thing I know is that JETP we're struggling with. The secretariat for JETP is at the ADB. I think my own experience around making sure that the whole of society, as Mari talked about, are brought along in the finding the solutions to it, and part of it is for us, from our role, is to help, as you mentioned, the diagnostics, to make sure that we are providing the countries. Many of them are talking here in the Philippines. The president, BBM, when he his inaugural speech, I was there. Climate change is front and center because it has such impact on lives and livelihoods, and he sees that. So part of our role, I guess, is to help them get there, to do these country platforms, to understand what are the needs, and to do these long-term, short-term systems for them. But yeah, we stand ready to help.
So I could carry this conversation for another hour or so, and the two of you are both so forthright and interesting. It would be so easy, but we're coming up to the top of the hour. What I'd like to do is give you a chance for a minute each. If there's one thing that you wish to say and you haven't said, or one message you want to impart at this great gathering that the Asia Society has brought together, what would that be? And maybe to you, Chantale, first, and then I'll end with Mari.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think we are also facing here in the region is there's a debt overhang for all of the, and the MDB system is about lending. There's technical assistance and whatnot. So whether this are we, the instruments in terms of how do we move out on this, there is very little fiscal space in a lot of these countries now because of the debt. Do we need to do another debt looking at this particular issue around it? But yeah, that's something that I've been thinking about as well.
Thank you. Mari.
The future is about a green growth, resilient and inclusive growth story. And it can be done, but it will require political will and understanding that this is about growth that is important for the people. And do not react to green nationalism that's happening in advanced countries by doing your own green nationalism. It's actually the time for us to also coordinate and collaborate with other countries in the region. And we have it all actually in this region. And I'm a great believer in regional supply chain as an answer to trying to navigate the geopolitics.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So thank you to Ambassador Wong. Thank you to Minister Special Advisor, Chief Honcho of Climate Finance, Mary Pangestu. And I just think it's really important, you know, as I perspire here in London in our summer heat wave, that there is no future for the planet. There is no future that is equitable or fair without Asia's green, fair, job-rich, youth-focused transition. And it is the responsibility of the entire world to do everything we can to help Asian peoples pull that off. So to the Asia Society, thank you. To our wonderful guest speakers, thank you. To our hosts, thank you. We have lots to do and we can only do it together. Thank you very much.